Welcome to the Businesses Start Here podcast, hosted by David Vigliotti and Vigliotti and Associates. We're here to talk with business owners and business experts to inspire and encourage entrepreneurs.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Businesses Start Here podcast. This is Dave Vigliotti, founder of Vigliotti Associates and host of the Businesses Start Here podcast. Today we have with us a serial entrepreneur who has been through all the ups and downs that we've been through and are going to go through. So I'm excited to hear his story and hear how he got from where he started to where he is now. And I'm going to let him tell much more about that story. So today's guest is Henry Daas. Henry, thanks for joining us, and we're glad to have you here.
Hey, it's great to be here. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So as I ask everybody at the start, tell me about how you got to where you are, and where are you?
Good question. I'm still going, right? I'm
Right.
62. I'll be 63 this summer, and I'm still rocking and rolling along. So, brief history of time. I started my first entrepreneurial business in 1991. I started it as a side hustle, right? As a lot of businesses have. First company, Abacus Solutions, was a computer vendor, Apple value-added reseller. It's basically what we were. But then we branched out into selling all the other brands of computer which were popular at the time, which most of don't exist anymore, like Compaq, right? They either got bought up or whatever. We spawned a leasing company. Later on, I started a factoring company after 9/11. I was in Manhattan at the time, and a lot of small companies were having a difficult time getting financing after that horrible event, especially if you were in Lower Manhattan. So I started factoring people's receivables. I started a real estate company. I had a company that built home theaters, stupidly expensive systems for people with, as I often used to say, more money than brains. But we did that for a long time. About 10 years ago, I started coaching people. So trying to impart some of my wisdom, some gray hair to folks who were, just coming up, just starting their businesses. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book called FQ Financial Intelligence. I really wrote it as a course. So now I not only coach entrepreneurs in entrepreneurship, but I coach just everyday people in how to grow and manage their money themselves. So, and that brings me to today.
And now you're here on the podcast.
Now I'm here on the podcast. Yep.
So tell me a little about the factoring business. I'm not sure many entrepreneurs know what factoring is. So it's basically, I'll let you explain. I know what it is. I want to hear it from someone who's done it. I haven't done it. So
factoring is it's very common in certain industries. My wife was a clothing designer for many, many years. So in the what is referred to as the schmata business, the rag business in New York, very common to factor your invoices. So what does it mean? Okay, so you've got an invoice out to a client. You're giving them, let's say you're giving them 2% net 10, net 30, which basically means if you pay me in 10 days, I'm going to give you a 2% discount. Otherwise, I'm giving you 30 days credit, right? Well, in some businesses, you ain't paid in 30 days. It's getting stretched out. I remember with my first company, Abacus, we went to a meeting for a group of hospitals that wanted to source lots and lots of computers. And this was a serious question. A guy in this, round table of people said, "How do you feel about net 180? I said, I have no feelings because I've never heard of it. They're looking for 6 months to pay. So you've got these receivables, but you need the cash now. Right? Nothing can kill a business quicker than a cash crunch. Right. So you factor your invoice. So what does it mean? It means I'm selling this $100,000 invoice to you. You're going to pay me at a discount, right? And I would determine what that discount would be based on the credit worthiness. Let's say it's 6%, right? So I'm going to give you $94,000 for this $100,000 invoice. And now I own it. You don't own it anymore. It's non-recourse, which means if the client doesn't pay, I'm on the hook. You're not.
Right.
So it's a nice little situation, but you're taking a little bit of a hit. So if you're in a low margin business, it's tough to really make factoring work. But if you're in a high margin business and you could afford that 6%, now 6% is just an average number. It could be 10%, it could be 2%, depending on what it is. I take the credit risk. So I would review the invoices. I would review the credit worthiness of who was on the hook for it, and then I would decide yay or nay, sort of a la carte, invoice by invoice basis. I would decide whether I wanted to buy it or not, and if so, at what discount. And it's a nice little business.
Yeah. That's something not many entrepreneurs, I think, know about or understand, unless they came up in the industry, in an industry that's common. So I think that's something that that is probably underutilized, depending on the industry. Like you said, it has to be a high margin industry. If you're only getting a 20% contribution margin to begin with, it's probably not an industry that's going to.
Yeah, you really have to drill down into it to see whether it makes sense. But for many of your listeners, they may not know about that. There's other types of esoteric financing things involving credit card receipts and stuff like that. I didn't really get involved in any of that stuff, but I know some businesses that have. The point is, have as many credit facilities available to you, even if you don't think you're going to need them. One of the first things, if I'm engaging a new client, one of the first things we do is take a look at their credit facility. A lot of them don't have any. I'm like, well, now's the time to get it, because I tell you what, when you need it is when the doors will get slammed in your face.
Right.
So even if it's just $100,000 line of credit, or an evergreen line, or a revolving line, a pay-to-play line, doesn't cost you anything. Sometimes it may cost you 100 basis points just to keep it open. Well worth it. I mean, and a basis point is, the 100th%. I have to educate them on the terminology. I don't want to throw too much terminology around.
Yeah.
But yeah, right. You got to pay a little bit of money for it, but think about how expensive it would be if you couldn't get it when you needed it. I mean, I can kill your business.
Yeah. And I think COVID brought a lot of that out. So I told a lot of clients, this isn't the fact that a lot of businesses hit financial difficulty at the same time is uncommon, but it's not uncommon for a business to hit financial difficulty. So if you're one of the people that wasn't prepared for this, you got to get out of jail free from the government. If this happens again, you're not going to survive because you already used that get out of jail free card. So having that funding structure, having 3 to 6 months of either cash in the bank or credit, something that's going to help float you if something bad happens. Because usually when it happens to you and you alone, or maybe your industry, and there's nobody coming to bail you out. So
it happened in the home theater business. I was lucky that I got out of it when I got out of it, but it contracted by a good 50% during the Great Recession. Yeah, people didn't have that discretionary money, especially on the consumer side, and businesses were cutting back. So yeah, it can kill you. On the other side of it, I remember the first time with Abacus Solutions where we had $1 million month, and it's like insane. I mean, I don't have the credit to fulfill these sales. I'm scrambling around, and at that point in time, I had what was called a flooring line, which is sort of like a receivable line with the main vendor that I used, Ingram Micro. They're still around today. They're one of the biggest vendors out there. But even $500,000 wasn't enough to do it. I'm scrounging around saying, like, where am I going to find money to buy this stuff? Right. I'm still going to make a margin, but if I can't provide it to the client, I'm sunk.
Yeah. Yeah. I think cash flow is one area that a lot of business owners understand to a point. They understand they need money in the bank when payrolls due or things like that. but the forecasting of cash flow is an area of great concern for me.
It gets neglected. People will spend a lot of time on their balance sheet and their income statement, and then their statement of cash flow, which is really kind of the thing that bridges those two. That gets ignored. I mean, I've said this on many podcasts. I've been on a lot of entrepreneurial podcasts. So I said, look, you only need to analyze two things in order to determine if your business is viable. One is cash flow. The other one's gross margin, right? Yeah. We already touched on that. The tighter your margins are, the better you're going to have to manage your money. But any business is viable if you can crack the code on those two things, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, there might be some industries or new businesses that haven't had a feasibility test yet that may not be, but
if you're like an FBA, fulfilled by Amazon business where you're playing in Amazon's sandbox and you have all of those contingent liabilities of or if you're a Google reseller who has to deal with the whimsy and whims of Google changing their algorithm or changing their rules. Sometimes all bets are off. It's like, okay, I'm with you.
Yeah. So what is something that you tell your clients? What's a big issue that you see, I guess, that's kind of common across all clients that you think entrepreneurs need to know when they start?
Well, I remember I did this, obviously before the lockdown. I did a talk. I had about 50 people in the room. And I said, you really need to know your numbers backwards and forwards as a business owner. And one of the guys chimed in who I know. And it's like, do I really have to know them backwards and forward? Can't I just kind of know them? And I said, well, I don't know. What do you think? You think you can just kind of know them? Yeah, you need to know them. Even if it's not you doing it, and I'm saying, hire a CFO, or even if it's a fractional CFO, and get the information that you need and understand this. And like you said, being able to predict the trajectory, understanding when you have seasonal changes. Not every business is seasonal, but many are, many that you might not even suspect. But the only way you can really figure that out is to collect a couple of years worth of data, or maybe a bunch of quarters, maybe 8 quarters worth of data, which would be 2 years, and look for patterns. And then you can make business decisions based on the patterns that you see instead of getting, caught with your trousers around your ankles.
Right. And then if you see a pattern and that pattern breaks, there's something that you need to do differently.
You got to pivot, right? Pivot, it's an overused term, right? I call them mini pivots sometimes. Sometimes a pivot is like a radical change where we were going left and now we're going to go right. And it's like, that's a whole different thing. That's changing you. That may be changing your business model because something has systemically changed with the business that you're in. Where, a mini pivot is like, we just have to make a little bit of a course correction, right? Sometimes it may just involve changing some vendors, right? We've become too dependent on too few vendors, right? With that first company, when I was an Apple authorized dealer, there were only 3 companies that I could buy from: Ingram, Maricel, and Tech Data. I think Tech Data is still around. I know Ingram's still around. But I think Maricel was bought by somebody or whatever. But those were my choices. I had 3 vendors and that was it. So negotiating sometimes on price was difficult,
right?
Because you don't have a lot of options out there.
Yeah, there's risk in areas that you may not realize. So there's supplier risk, there's customer risk. I think most people are familiar with the risk of having over 40% or whatever percentage you're comfortable with of your sales through one customer. But that's the point. Supplier risk could be just as important. If you're getting everything from one supplier and they're the only provider, then if something happens to them, look at the supply chain issues we're having now. It's a global thing.
Yes.
But that could happen to one of your suppliers at any moment.
Well, yeah, you're seeing it. You're seeing it in all sorts of different industries. Look at the automobile industry, which has been constricted. So what's happened? There's been a ripple effect. Used cars have gone, through the roof.
Yeah.
Right. I bought a car, I guess 2 Decembers ago, a fancy Jeep, and I bet I could sell it for more than I paid for it, even with 25,000 miles on it.
Yeah, that's
But
not
what
a
am I
car.
going to replace it with?
Right.
Something else I'm going to overpay for.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, because even with the housing market, I have a friend that really wants to sell his house and just live on a trailer on his parents' property. So that's the
People
only
do
way
it.
that makes sense right now.
Yeah.
If you're gonna have somewhere and then live there for a year or two, and then once the prices come back down, you can probably get double the house for the same price that you sold yours for.
If you're going to change markets, I bought that car a week before I bought the house I'm in right now. And I didn't want to buy in the middle of the pandemic, but my wife and I had planned it because we were empty nesters and we wanted to, kind of get out of the New York City area and get up to the country. So our move wasn't driven by all the motives of the pandemic. We just got kind of caught up in the wash with that.
Yeah.
But we had other friends who sold their house in New Jersey and they moved to Florida. Now, if you're changing venues, they sold a house and he just bought a house down there for half the price of what he was paying in New Jersey, and probably for 15% of the taxes. Right.
Right.
So if you're going to do that sort of move, so your friend is kind of saying, well, I'll sell my place, but I'll just buy an RV, and I'll do that. And
Right.
and I know lots of people. I've had lots of clients who run location independent businesses, or they're digital nomads. In fact, I was in a mastermind group until recently with a fella who he's South African, but he has an RV and he travels all over Europe. During the course of that mastermind, he started in the UK and he ended up in Turkey.
Oh, wow.
And he runs his business out of it. He's got an internet setup with a backup, with like a dial backup in case the internet goes out. It's one way to live your life, not for everybody.
Right.
But you can do it.
Yeah, this guy's he actually has the RV already, so he's a traveler and his family's very used to it. So if that fits your lifestyle, that's a great move financially.
And you can run a location independent business there. You can have staff. I've had clients who've got who basically run a 24-hour operation. They've got staff in Eastern Europe. They've got staff in the Philippines. Philippines is a very popular place for folks to staff up. You can get a lot of bodies for not a lot of money. There's other liabilities that come with that, right? When a person quits their job in the Philippines, you know how you know? They didn't show up.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
So once you get used to their operational schema there, sure. I had a VA in Vietnam, and she was exactly 12 hours difference than me. So while I was sleeping, she was doing a whole bunch of stuff, and then she would slack me in the morning, and I paid her $7 an hour.
Right.
It was great.
Yeah. I want to go back to something. So you're your book is FQ, Financial Intelligence. One thing that you hear all the time when somebody's going to buy a house is don't make any major purchases. And you said you bought a car a week before you bought a house.
I did. Yeah, I did. Actually, it was the first time I ever put a car in my wife's name. Which is interesting that it's a good thing that you brought up, because what happened was I've bought all the cars that we've ever owned in my name, and I bought the house in my name, so it's not in her name at all. Okay. So when we went in to buy the car, I said, honey, this is you. You and your fancy 800 credit score are going to go out for a spin today, and yeah, you're going to negotiate it. It was very funny. It was almost like I was dealing with a child. I've been married for 30. How long? 30. We've been together since 1988. So what is that? 34 years. Yeah. I just sort of stood there back like the proud husband, and it's like, you work your magic.
Yeah.
And let them give you the note and this and that, and I'll advise you. But no, this is in your name. It's your car. Yeah. They're her first car at 60 years old, buying her first car.
That's great.
It was pretty funny. But it worked out fine. Yeah, but I told the guy there. He actually said to me, "Can we do this jointly?" I said, "No, dude. I got to close on a house. I cannot." Now, the ironic thing about it is I ended up closing on the house for cash anyway, so I probably could have done it.
Right.
But at that time, my mortgage broker like totally screwed up everything I had to do with the mortgage. So I find, because I made, if anybody who's been in the housing market, cash is king. Right. I had to pay about 20% over ask, and I had to offer all cash. Wow. And I found out later that they had higher offers, but they were mortgage contingent. So they went with the sure thing. So yeah. So been reading all these horror stories about folks getting shut out on houses and then getting frustrated and then just throwing caution to the wind and paying way over the ask just to get it done. Right. No one was putting a gun to our head. We wanted to move. In fact, we were kind of late to the dance. We were probably a year late, but the pandemic had delayed that for us. Yeah.
So one thing that I tell people all the time is you, as a business owner, you can't untangle your personal finances from the business finance. Obviously, there's commingling of funds that you need to avoid and need to keep them separate.
Yeah.
But really, to start a business, you need to understand your personal finances. So that's why I'm excited to hear you talk a little bit about some of your top tips that you provide people for personal finances that I think are most important probably for entrepreneurs.
Well, let's talk about the first part, because I remember when I was starting my first business, reading all this stuff, and I think one piece of advice said you should have a year's worth of expenses put away before you ever think about starting a business. And I swear that was real. And there are probably people out there listening to this who said, "Yeah, I've seen that advice before." I'm like, not a single business in America would ever be created if you followed that rule. I mean, in my book, I wrote, if you have $10 in your pocket, you have a higher net worth than 25% of Americans.
Right.
I mean, it's sad. I mean, the statistics are really kind of humbling. I've been writing a thread in one of my, I have a couple of newsletters that I send out to what I call my FQers, my FQ. One is a weekly thing where I just kind of pluck things out of the news that I think people should know, and I write sort of a snarky headline on it and some text around it. And then the other one I've been writing for probably the past 3 months on wealth inequality. So I've been talking a lot about that. But there's a Chinese wall between your personal finances and your business finances in theory, but it doesn't work that way. I can't even tell you how many $10,000 checks I wrote out of my personal account to the company, way back in the day before I learned not to do that. Right? It's like, shit, we are not going to make payroll on Friday. So I just write a check, shove it in the company. I make payroll and it's not because we weren't doing well. We were doing great business, but again, cash flow comes up, and I was in many cases the bank of last resort. I was fortunate that I was in the position to do that, but that gets old. It's like, I don't want to do that.
Right.
I got to get smarter about that. But, I have, I've had some clients in the past who have really conflated the business. They're building a house. Even my own business partner did that. He was building a house in the Hamptons, while we're trying to run this company, and he needs the money out of the company in order to be able to build this, $1 million McMansion that he was building.
Right.
And now your decision-making process gets skewed, because are you making the decision because I need the money now for my lifestyle, but it may be detrimental to the business in the long run.
Right.
So, pay yourself a salary. We used to fight over retirement funding because we had the SEP plan, and I wanted to max out the SEP plan because as an FQer, I'm a big believer that you should take advantage of all of the tax breaks, and there's not a lot of them that the government will give you.
Right.
So you sock some money away. The Roth IRA is the holy grail. Forget about today's deduction. I want to sock as much money as I can right? I wrote a little while ago about Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel has $5 billion in a Roth IRA.
Yeah.
That's a big loophole, but he put a whole ton of PayPal shares in. He made a $1,700. He has $1,700 of principal that he spent to fund a Roth IRA in 1998, and it's now worth $5 billion. Good work if you can get it.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah, it is. I'm telling you, that guy's smart. He's definitely smart. Didn't get where he was because he's a dummy. But so you want to be able to adapt some of those habits, obviously, of managing your personal finances and building up the balance sheet and the income statement and the cash flows for your business. And if you need a balloon payment at some time for a life event, hopefully if you've done things well, you'll have the opportunity to do that.
Right.
But if you're going to just use it as a personal piggy bank to kind of prop up cash flow, then if the tide does go out, you're sunk.
Right.
And everything then falls apart. Your business falls apart, and then your personal falls apart because your personal spending was predicated on your business doing well. Well, your business is doing well. And there's a whole cascade effect.
Yeah. So that's something. So when we started our business, we had a couple $100 maybe in savings. We had $1,000 a month in recurring revenue, and it was a struggle, but we were able to get through it. And we, at the beginning, that was funding our lifestyle. I mean, and it wasn't much, but it was that the business was the only thing we had coming in. But it's not a good way to live.
It's a tough way to do it. When I started my first business,
time.
My wife had a really good job, so it didn't really impact our lifestyle. The first year of my first company, I took $1,000 a month out from the company, just a token salary. I had quit a $60,000 a year job with really gold-plated benefits because I worked for the New York Stock Exchange, and it took me 3 years to replace that salary, which is actually pretty quick.
Yeah.
Right. I think, I recommend that to people, that you should set a goal. 36 months later, whatever I gave up, I want to get back. And work towards that goal, and don't cannibalize it to try to replace all that money from the get-go. I think that's a mistake that people make. It's not going to work that way. So in theory, it would be nice to have a year's worth of expenses put away for a rainy day. It's the rare cat that can do that, though, I will tell you.
Yeah, it's not common. And the other thing, like you said, is using leverage or opening credit facilities so that you're not personally dipping in or making payments to fund the business. There's risk involved in that, obviously. I personally, I understand the benefit of credit. I don't like it for myself, but I understand the need for it, and we do have options open to us that if we need it, we can pull on it. But that's kind of
some people don't personally guarantee anything. It's like, well, no one's going to loan you money. Now, here's the other trap that people fall into, which I've seen with my own clients, and I've seen other people do it. I actually just got something from a former business partner who wants to do something in the NFT world, and he wants to he's looking for somebody, asking for me to use my network, and he wants to offer them, in lieu of a salary, equity. Right. And people make this mistake all the time. They look at it this way. They say, well, look, I could pay this guy $100,000, or I could pay him or her $30,000, and I'll give them a piece of equity of my business. Right. And I say that is the most expensive way to buy a person.
Yep.
Oh, why is that, Henry? Well, because if my business goes out, the equity is worth nothing. It's like, yeah, well, what happens if the business kicks ass?
Right.
You just gave this little haircut to save yourself a few bucks up front for some potentially massive payout. I actually had this happen with a client. He had already given away 15% of his company. He's the former client. So he'd already given away 15% of his company before he came to me. And I said, wow. And about 2 years into our relationship, it wasn't working out with the guy. I said, well, we have to unwind this.
Right.
And we worked on a strategy. I said, do the Jerry Maguire, go to a public place to do this, right? In case there's some histrionics.
Right.
And basically you're going to have to fire the guy. And I want you to have a document, backing it up that addresses his equity.
Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, he slacks me after that and said, not only did I get him to sort of voluntarily leave the company, but he forfeited his equity.
Wow.
2 months after that, he got into an incubator with a I think a $5 million valuation. So I said, you do the math on what that 15% was worth.
Right.
I said, so you're Houdini. You conjured that. I said, you got rid of that. I hope he never finds out about the valuation. I have no idea what you did. Did you do like a Vito Corleone thing? Did you put a gun on the table?
You may not want to know.
Take the gun, take the cannoli, leave the gun, take the cannoli. I have no idea. But he pulled it off. I was like, you're like 1 in a million to be able to pull that off, because I've seen people have business falling out, and the guy leaves, and he still owns the equity. There's no provision within the deal that says the equity is predicated on your employment within the company.
Right.
It's like, why would you do that? Do a phantom equity deal. Right. And for the folks who don't know what that is, it's basically a document that says, look, you don't have any real equity, but if there is a liquidity event, you're entitled to this.
Right.
And if there's never a liquidity event or you go out of business, there's nothing there for them to ever execute. But it shows them that, look, if we get swallowed up or we get sold for a big pile of cheddar, you'll be compensated.
Yeah.
Let's work. I
think a lot of times there's two things you need to look at when you run a business, right? There's the short term and the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Simplify it. And people get so caught up in the short term that they don't even have any long term thought. They just, what do I need to do to survive today? But if you take the long term view as well, it's what do I need to do to survive today, putting us in the best position to be successful in the long term needs to be the way it's looked at. There needs to be that extra sentence.
Yeah. Well, I'll take it one step further. People pitch me on businesses, and the first question I ask them is, okay, what's your exit strategy? It's like, dude, this is just an idea for a business. So yeah, but so many decisions are going to be predicated on how you want to exit. Are you in a place where you're going to get swallowed up by somebody? Or are you looking to go 18 months and get bought by Amazon or Google or whatever? You're trying to do a deal like that. Are you trying to do something where you want to leave a legacy for your kids? Right? Do you want to die with your boots on? A lot of entrepreneurs are like, well, no, I'm going to run this business till I die.
Right.
Like, really? You sure you want to do that?
Right.
But that's what you want to do. We will operate under that strategy.
Right.
But we kind of have to have a bit of an idea of where this thing is going. And you need to make decisions. Or do you just want to run the thing to the point where the term I use is obsolete yourself as the business owner? And so that all you're really doing is cashing the checks and other people are running it, which is again, like the Roth IRA, that's the holy grail.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we talk all the time with our clients, you need to start with the end in mind, right? So that determines what entity type you choose, whether it's an LLC or an S Corp.
Sure.
Or
C Corp. I've had them all. LLC, C Corp, S Corp.
Yeah.
It all depends on the business you're in.
And there's some tax implications. There may be some other strategies we do with the subchapter qualified S. So things like that, getting a little technical here, but but you have to make the decision from the start based on where you think you're going to finish.
You don't want to make a decision that's going to box you in later on down the line. Right. So you say, well, we'll start as an LLC, and if we have to change to an S or a C Corp, we have a path to do that.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't take much. Just figure that stuff out up front.
Yeah, it just takes a little bit of thinking, right?
Yeah, a little bit of forethought. It's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, there's not a right or wrong answer. It's what do you want the end result to be? Okay, great. Now we'll help you get there.
Yep.
So your book, it's been out for how long now? I forget.
I think I published it right before the pandemic. My timing wasn't particularly great. It actually started as a course. I wrote it as a 20-week course, and then I backed into the book because after I tested it with a dozen people, and they're like, Henry, you should turn this into a book. And I said, really? Isn't that like eating my seed corn? And they're like, no, if people like the book, they'll want to learn it from the master. I'm like, all right. But it was a big task because I had never written a book before, and I've got 250 infographics. I had to A, make them legal to publish, and B, I had to make them publishable because a lot of them were just dragged off the internet. And my designer, I hired a designer to do it in InDesign, and he's like, these are not going to work. So I found a guy in Serbia who for $10 a graphic would turn them into vector files at 300 DPI. And it's like, okay. So, but then putting all this stuff together and then hiring a copy editor and then hiring proofreaders, lot of work.
Yeah.
But it was good. It came out great.
Yeah. It looks great. I ordered a copy, so I'm waiting for it to get here. So I'm excited to start reading it. And it seems like we're kind of on the same
the color copy. I don't think I offer the color copy. I did print one in color. It is like magnificent. It belongs in the Smithsonian. If I do say so myself. I'm like, wow, that really looks good. It costs like $22 for me to print it. It's like,
really?
I'm going to print one hard copy in color. Yeah. It's funny.
Wow. So one question that I'd like to have answered is, what do you think is the biggest money trap, or where are people wasting their money most often?
Well, the first chapter of the book is called The Psychology of Money. And what I think the biggest, certainly one of the biggest traps, and one of the ongoing themes throughout the book is risk. They don't do a good job of assessing not only today's risk, but again, talking about forethought, the risk, coming down the line. But before we even get to all of that, we got to figure out what are our tendencies? How does our brain work? Right. I consider there's two goalposts. There's scarcity and abundance. Right. My mother was a depression baby. She lived her entire life in scarcity. Yeah. Just did. I, as a result of that, have inherited the scarcity gene. However, I don't live my life in scarcity. I live my life in abundance, but often they're in conflict. Right. So I don't deprive myself of doing the things that I want to do. But yet I'm always thinking about, the market's going down and this and that. But I'm also looking at opportunities to scoop up bargains. Right now, the market's going through a little bit of a hiccup, and I've been trading the markets for 40 years. And with Ukraine and this and that, even though when you think about it from a logical perspective, a war in Ukraine really doesn't have much of an impact, much as I hate to say it. But it will scare people, and it'll cause people to flight to safety. That's the scarcity in them, the unknown. Right. The smart money is going to look at this and say, well, if you want to bash these stocks, which 3 days ago were selling at $100 and now they're selling at $60, you tell me what's changed. What's changed is people's perception. Right. But the fundamentals of it, the numbers and the potential numbers moving forward, are not going to be impacted. Sure, in the oil patch, maybe oil will go up to $120. Right. So yeah. So if you own an oil company or that, maybe it'll get impacted. Maybe it'll go up. Maybe it'll go down. Don't know. But is it really impacting, Apple's fortunes? Maybe so. The cost to ship things, the cost to do this, but not enough to warrant a 40% discount in 2 days, which is what you see in markets. But from your own psychology, you got to say, how much risk am I willing to tolerate? Because I tell people, look, I can teach you to trade stocks. What I can't teach you is how to manage the risk around that and how not to panic when we get black swan events, and not how to do stupid stuff when you're really killing it. Right? Every morning I do a little 5-question psychological profile, And I get one of three answers. It's either trade with caution, or no trade. Today happened to be a no trade day, right? So even if a trade lands on my lap, long, short, whatever it might be, I'm forbidden to execute it, because my little psychological profile is telling me I'm not in a good mental frame of mind to do that. And I tell people, if you're going to manage money or trade or do whatever, it should be incredibly boring.
Right.
If it is not incredibly boring, you are doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Just how it is.
Yeah. People don't want to hear that. They want.
That's not what sells.
Yeah.
No, I will tell you, I'm the world's worst marketer, right? Because I'm very sober. I'm an old school boomer. I'm telling you that it's going to take discipline, hard work. You're going to have to do research. You're going to have to spend some time when you're analyzing what it is that you want to buy or sell. Everything that you do has to have a justification. You need to, even if it's just one sentence, that doesn't sell for squat. What sells is crypto FOMO, or a website with a Ferrari and a beautiful babe in a bikini. That stuff sells like hotcakes.
Right.
It just does.
Yeah.
And I should probably do that. I probably should have put that on the cover of my book. Or because I wrote something about how all the books have the word rich in the title, right?
Yeah.
Right. I can make you rich. I write on my book, it says there's a vast difference between being rich and having a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right. If you're a kindergarten teacher and you love what you do and you make $65,000 a year, you're rich.
Yeah.
You are. But you're not going to have a lot of money.
Right.
Simple as that.
Yeah. All right. So we're just about out of time. I'd like to finish with any advice you have for entrepreneurs. I know we went through a good bit of it. If there's anything that you think we missed that you wanted to go over.
There's probably a ton of different stuff. I will tell you that my chapter 16 of my book is about entrepreneurship. So I kind of go through some of the journeys, some of the trials and tribulations. I'll give you one other little anecdote. I had a client a couple of years ago. Was in the real estate business, and he had this really nice, cute, nice little app that ran on an iPad for managing. And I just got my real estate license a couple of months ago, so I'm actually a salesperson here. So I'm seeing all the tools and the MLS, the multiple listing services.
Yeah.
And so I said, who's your competition? He said, nobody. I said, well, that scares the bejesus out of me.
Yeah.
I said, because I have a saying, you ain't that smart, right? You just ain't. If you think you invented something that no one has ever thought about or invented, there's probably a reason for it.
Right.
Right. Either a whole bunch of people have tried and failed, or other people have just analyzed it and said it's not even worth trying because there's no margin here. Right. That if you build it, they will come. Well, if you build it, you may lose a lot of money too. So he actually went to an acquaintance, had a meeting, and she wrote a really scathing email to him. I was something I really vitriolic. She obviously didn't like the guy. And she said something like, you're a wannabe, Bob, because he sent it to me. And then at the end of it, she mentioned a couple of companies that she said were doing exactly what he was doing. So I looked one of them up on Crunchbase, and they had raised $14 million from some VCs, and 18 months later had sold it for, I think, $115 million to Zillow.
Wow.
And I wrote back to him and I said, you should send her a fruit basket as a thank you, because she just proved that you've got a good business idea.
Yeah.
It's just really as simple as that. And so I tell people, even if your business is struggling, take it to, everybody has a friend who's negative about everything. Right. I have children that are like that, so I don't have to go very far. So go to that really super negative friend and pitch your idea, even if you're up and running or whatever. Pitch it and let them tear it to shreds.
That's good.
Right. Because
that's really good advice.
Because if you can survive that, if they can give you every argument in the world while you're an idiot and this is all going to crash and burn, and then you can analyze that and say, Yeah, but I don't think he's right. And here's why. You can justify that. Or I don't think she's right. And here's the evidence that goes contrary. You might actually be onto something.
Yeah. That's really good. I'm an eternal optimist.
All entrepreneurs. The
Right.
entrepreneur who's standing in front of the bankruptcy judge is pleading for one more chance. I
Right.
know I can turn this ship around. You cannot be an entrepreneur. I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah.
I say that to people all the time. You cannot be an entrepreneur without having loads and loads of optimism, because it will crush you otherwise.
Yeah.
It will just crush you. You'll never get up in the morning.
Yeah. And my wife is not a pessimist by any means, but she's realistic. So having her,
it's kind of the same thing. Right. The glass is not, what I often say is, the glass is not half empty. The glass is not half full. The glass is simply the wrong size.
Yeah. Yeah. So having someone to bounce those ideas off of when I have too many ideas that are just awful.
I have saved trillions of dollars in not executing my stupid ass ideas. Because I'm like you. I come up with ideas all the time, and then I don't execute them because, in fact, I never write them down. I write. I'm a screenwriter. I've written 11 screenplays, and I get ideas for screenplays all the time, but I never write them down. I keep them in my head, because if they can stay in my head for the long term, that means they've got stickiness. Like I wrote a screenplay a couple of years ago. I got the idea 30 years ago, and it sat in my brain for 30 years. And then I finally sat down and I wrote it. That's a sticky idea. The stuff that flies away and that you forget, there's a reason, it's a natural filtering mechanism.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I never thought of that.
You're welcome.
Well, on that note,
yeah.
I appreciate you spending time with us, Henry. It was a great conversation, very enlightening. I think I was hoping we disagree. I think we talked about our pre-call that we were hoping to disagree, but unfortunately we didn't.
I can't do anything about that. We only got 45 minutes. I'm sure if we came up with some other topics, we would find ourselves at odds.
Right. Yeah. So at least financially we agree, in entrepreneurship we agree on the most part, but I appreciate you coming on and taking the time to talk to us and educate us.
I love that you had me. It was great. A lot of fun.
Sorry. So that's another episode of the Businesses Start Here podcast. Thanks again to Henry for coming on. Be sure to check out his website and get his book, The FQ Financial Intelligence. Just listening to him talk, I know it's going to be a good book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I am. It's on my list. So thanks again to Henry. And if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to talk about the podcast, we'd love to hear it. If there's any guests you'd like to have us bring on, please let us know. But until next time, we're looking forward to hearing how you're growing your business.